Hello and welcome to Brookline Interactive Group. I'm Tommy Vitolo, and as I mentioned earlier, our guest of the week is Ihssane Leckey. She's running for Congress, Massachusetts 4th District, and we've got about 25 minutes to get to know her, talk with her a little bit. Ihssane, thank you for being on the show. The first question is sort of an easy one. Tell us about life from birth until about 2019. What have you been up to?
Thank you so much, Tommy, for having me, and thanks for doing this. It's great for our community to get engaged on what's going on for federal representation and why does that even matter to voters right now. Um, you know, my story is the story of the working class. It's the story of America. I grew up in Morocco, North Africa, to a public school teacher father and a farmer mother. I have three older brothers. And, we grew up paycheck to paycheck. We knew exactly what the pink slips meant. And we grew up on the values of giving no matter how little we have. Every success that we reach in our life is a success to be used to relieve those who don't have the same opportunities. And so that really guided me throughout my journey before coming to the US and after. When I was 13, I lost my father because we could not afford to treat his heart condition. And that truly put a dent on my family financially and emotionally. And then when I was 17, I survived an illegal abortion that almost took my life. And I wanted to truly live in freedom. And the first thing that came to mind was America. I always dreamed of coming to America, even though I knew that people like me who don't come from a big name, who don't come with the political relationships, are very unlikely to get a visitor visa to the richest, most powerful country in the world. But when that happened, I was 20 years old, so excited to get on that plane. I came here with a little suitcase and no money. And I started getting to work, just like every American. I mopped the floors in the restaurants and I was a babysitter. And I earned poverty wages. I faced sexual harassment and wage theft. And that's when it really hit me that what we normally call the immigrant struggle is not just the immigrant struggle, is millions of people across America who are struggling, living in poverty, and not feeling that they have protection or representation to have a life with dignity and a good paying job. And so I decided to do something about it. You can tell I'm always running on survival mode. I always believe that we can do something to solve our biggest problems. And I believe that in America, the richest country in the world, we can eliminate poverty. So I went on putting myself through community college, and then I earned a Women in Math scholarship to come to Boston University, and I studied economics and math. I graduated right after the financial crisis of 2008, and I saw how our government decided to give Wall Street giant blank checks bailouts, leaving people homeless and jobless, and really breaking families apart. So I decided to be a Wall Street regulator. I joined the Federal Reserve, and I worked on the Dodd-Frank regulation, holding accountable the biggest banks in our country, and furthermore, protecting our economy from another downturn that could be worse than 2008, and building a resilient economy that can stand in the face of future shocks. When Trump took office, he immediately started dismantling that program. And I was shocked to see that it wasn't only Republicans who voted with him, but also some of the Democrats who were taking money from the banks that I was regulating. And I knew it was very dangerous. But furthermore, Trump attacked all of our communities. He attacked our Muslim community, our Jewish community, our communities of color, immigrants, women, LGBTQ. Everywhere I turned, I found hurt and pain in our communities, being divided and set against each other. So I had to step in, and I had to, with urgency and with love and with compassion, bring communities together. And I started that work. I left my high profile job to organize in the community for racial justice, for economic justice, for environmental justice, for healthcare, for interfaith, to bring the community of the fourth together so that we can be strong in the face of hatred. And running for Congress in this district is, again, us deciding to work through the struggle and into resilience together.
So I want to explore that run for Congress a little bit more, and then I want to get back to the Federal Reserve. You talked about the challenges the country faces, these big problems, and your interest in fixing them. But there's lots of ways to do that, both lots of elected offices and other ways. You chose to enter against incumbent Joe Kennedy, who was running for re-election to the House, right? You didn't see an open seat and run for it. You chose to run against one of the strongest and safest incumbents in the country. So tell us a little more about that decision. And then maybe if you could take a minute to walk us through how your race for Congress has evolved, given Congressman Kennedy's decision to run for Senate, given COVID. Tell us about how your campaign has changed. But first, tell us how you came to run against Congressman Kennedy in the first place.
That's right, Tommy. My decision to run against Congressman Kennedy before he decided to leave the seat and run for Senate was profoundly in standing up against complacency. Our district has come to Congressman Joe Kennedy and asked for leadership and bold leadership on the climate emergency, first and foremost. And a lot of our children were faced with, a lot of sidelining, and that was not acceptable. That's the biggest emergency that we faced. And then I saw that when we were organizing for Medicare for All for 2 years, we were faced with the same style of leadership, of sidelining, and of, this office is not for somebody to go and take a vote. This is not what leadership is. What leadership is leading boldly within Congress to create coalitions to pass policies and to stand up to hate all the time and conditionally, to also organize on the ground, which we have been missing in this district. We have not had a representative who actually organizes coalitions right here in the district to fight with us and to listen to them and to their demands so that we can take that into the policy making. But at the end of the day, when you ask, why is it that somebody who has a big name, who had $4 million cash on hand, is not acting boldly in Congress? Look at where their money comes from. And he was funded by pharmaceutical corporations, and he was invested in fossil fuel corporations, and he was taking money from the banks that I was regulating. Somebody had to step in. Somebody had to be truly about our democracy and to say, we, the people, will stand up against complacency. We've done it the nice way. We've showed up. We've rallied at the office. But when we're not feeling heard, we have to step in and exercise our democratic rights of challenging incumbents.
So you finished, you studied math and economics in undergrad, so did I. You finished just as an economic crisis had begun, so did I. I finished my undergrad and master's degree a few weeks after 9/11. And so, we both probably have books like this on our shelf, really nerdy, mathy economics, right? Like really crazy stuff. But you went ahead and put it to use working for the Federal Reserve, and surely that has that experience, both the academic and the professional experience, has shaped your view on what Congress ought to be doing going forward with respect to regulating banks, regulating the stock markets, and so forth. Can you share a little bit about how you would like to see Congress evolve here, how you as a congressperson would advocate for the kinds of changes you're thinking about?
Well, these issues are really interrelated. The nerdy books, which I love, which I love very much, actually do bring a deeper understanding and explanation of how our economy as a whole works and how are we interrelated between our social issues and our and our scientific issues like climate change and like COVID-19, between our community here in America and our international community as a globe. That having that lens of being able to process data, of being able to understand discrepancies, to find answers to questions, or even delve into programming. So, one of the things that I did was to review thousands of lines of programs that model what it's like to have another economic crisis worse than 2008. We were literally trying to look into the future and prepare. And here's one thing that I say to give an example of where the state of our country is right now when it comes to risk assessment. What we were doing at the Federal Reserve is that we were looking at all of our financial sector, especially the biggest players that were deemed too big to fail. And we were looking at their structure from within and their connectedness across the financial sector and across the consumers. And where we're trying to detect what are the risks that could arise either from within these giant banks or from outside threats, be it credit card debt or student debt or medical debt or mortgages, or be it counterparty debt where these institutions are lending to each other. And if one of them fails, it can bring the whole system down with it. We also thought about internationally. We were looking at, for example, the Brexit. What would the Brexit effect be on our economy in the US? We know that these giant banks that we have here have interconnectedness with the European market, with the Middle East market, with the Asian market. They are everywhere. And so we needed to understand the scope of the world economy and the scope of the household economy within the US and connects everything together. It's very complex work. It requires a lot of resources, a lot of smarts, and a lot of integrity. Because as somebody who worked in the federal government, I wasn't paid the pay that the people who worked at the big banks were getting paid. And a lot of people, especially during deregulation, when Trump took office, a lot of people who worked in the regulatory side stepped across the street, tripled their salaries, and they went with insider information that those big banks needed to know. And that's not the trust we need. That's not the trust we need. That's why when you hear me talk about one of the things that I will carry into Congress is to close the revolving door so that what we get to know about our markets stays inside, and the way we develop regulation that is effective is not leaking into the banks, and then it's causing us to waste our taxpayer money. I worked on bringing efficient regulation across the OCC, the FDIC, the CFPB, and the Fed. And in that work, I truly appreciated what Elizabeth Warren had done, Senator Elizabeth Warren, with the CFPB before Trump took office again, because that information on consumer finance filled a blind spot that we had at the Federal Reserve. We needed to know what these big banks were doing with predatory lending. We needed to know what they were doing, for example, with creating fake accounts, and the effect of that on taking our economy down and on threatening the jobs of our working families. We're going to need this knowledge in Congress. I will be one of the very, very few who understand how we're going to build a resilient economy, making sure that we are hedging our risk, identifying the risk and hedging it, making sure that we are proactive in our policies. And all of my agenda, from Medicare for All to the Green New Deal, to getting corporate money out of politics, to universal family care, to ending our, our forever wars, all of that agenda is built on the knowledge that I actually that I brought in from the Federal Reserve work and on what I've seen on the ground across the districts and people's demands.
So you mentioned that there are very few Congress people with the sort of banking and financial expertise you have. There are also not a whole lot of Congress people with young children. But you do. You have, you posted a beautiful photo of you and your daughter this morning on Twitter. And so I want to ask you about COVID as it relates to K through 12 education. This is an issue where we seem to be lacking local, state, and national leadership. What does public education look like starting next month? Do you have any thoughts on what communities in the 4th District, how they should weigh priorities and metrics in deciding what public education should look like in September and how that should evolve?
Oh, Tommy, you and I have children, and they're school-age children, and we understand this is a very, very complex issue. And the primary problem is that we're not getting nearly enough funding from the federal government. That's the primary problem, and that problem existed before COVID-19. We already, our schools were already underfunded. We were already suffering from inequity. This district is the mirror image of America, where we have towns that are extremely underfunded and have extreme poverty, and we have towns that are wealthy, but even within those towns, you start to dig deeper and find communities who are not living in that same privilege. And so this brings to question, what are we going to do about our school system without having the federal funding that we need? When I'm in there in January, it might be too late for so many families who are already suffering from this right now, right? But I am going to work to bring the federal funding for all of our school system, no matter the zip code, to make sure that every child is receiving the education that they need the way they need it. And this is not just about giving children internet and computers. It is much more complex than that. Because when you have children in a single mom, working single mom who is working as a frontline worker, and she cannot afford to have childcare. She does not have family who's gonna come and pick up her children and stay with them. What is her choice? She's gonna have to show up to that job, leave those children alone at home. And that is traumatizing and that is unsafe. And she knows in her heart that she's not having peace of mind leaving those children at home. However, you can give those children internet and computers, but how is that gonna help them? But so with the school issue, I see that parents who have the means are able to kind of make up solutions to their children and see how they can educate them. Especially that we understand there are parents who are working full-time from home, where their management tells them, oh yeah, I understand you have kids. I've been through that. My kid was, my Nora was sick once and I asked to work from home. And I was not offered family sick leave. I was told you can go and take time from your PTO, from your time off, and I didn't have any time off. So I was going to work from home with a sick child, and it was very difficult. These are issues that our families are going through right now. But equity is going to be our role. We're going to have to survive this together. We're going to have to think about the families who are most vulnerable and the children who are most vulnerable, and give them the space first. And those of us who have the means to be patient and to be giving. I'm not going to say that this is a problem that should land on the shoulders of the towns only or the state only. We understand we're all in COVID. Revenue is crushed at the town level, is crushed at the state level, and we need the federal government to bail out our children, to bail out our schools, to bail out our hospitals, to bail out our towns and our states. And I want to remind us that what Trump has been doing is literally putting us in a form of economic sanctioning for the blue states, because he had refused to extend aid to the blue states for COVID-19. And that has crushed us economically, because it's making it difficult for us to contain the virus so that we can reopen our economies as quickly as possible. So we have to keep that in mind, that we are fighting against bigger forces than just our school decisions or what our educators are saying to protect our children. I say this with compassion, and as a parent of a school-aged child, I've struggled with the idea of sending my child back to school because my mother is here, and she's originally from Morocco, and she came to visit, and she's stuck with us. Look at the intersectionality of the issues. The immigration department laid off over 75% of staff who process visas. So my mom does not have a status as an immigrant right now. So she's stuck with us in the house. She's 69 years old. And every time I think about sending Nora to school in person, I'm worried about her bringing the virus back to my mom and my mom dying. This condition is being lived by millions in America right now who are just struggling about this decision about the school. Every family has their own needs, and we're just going to have to be patient with each other as we figure out bring in more funding as soon as possible from the federal government to resolve these issues.
We've got time for one more question, and it's kind of a doozy. I'm working a few angles here. I've been thinking about the murder of George Floyd by 4 officers and how that reawoke really important conversations about race, about Black Lives Matters. You identify as a person of color, and so I'm sure you've been thinking about representation in different forms and how it relates to the district as a whole, from Brookline and Newton all the way down to Fall River. So I just want to throw that at you, take a couple of minutes. We don't have a ton of time, but give us some thoughts, give us some insight about how skin color and other related issues matter right now within our community and within the district.
Well, with the George Floyd loss has definitely hit our country really hard. And what it did, it made it more visible and more heard that the struggle of the Black community in particular has been ripping apart families for so long and hasn't been addressed by us, all of us. I do identify as a woman of color, and I am a woman of color. It's something that I came to learn about myself here in America, and I learned it the hard way. I was in Texas canvassing for a Democrat, and I was in one of the most conservative areas in Texas. And this woman asked me, where are you from? And I said, I'm from America. and she came so close to my skin and she said, yeah, but your skin is brown. What's your nationality? And at that moment, I realized that I could no longer be shy or careful or feel like I'm trying to take space about being a woman of color or any of that. And that the struggle of the immigrant is very, very much tied to the struggle of Black people in this country. And we have to build that solidarity across all people of color, across white people, across indigenous people. It doesn't matter what your skin color is. The fight against racial injustice is a fight for all of us. And we in particular, people who have more color privilege than others, have to stand up stronger. Being a woman of color is more about that, finding that power through the struggle. That when we feel that we are underestimated, that we are under the boots, that we are not taken seriously, that our hair is too ethnic, or we don't look a certain way, we don't talk a certain way, we don't compose ourselves a certain way, that we are again being boxed up and compared to our white peers who also were being forced to behave a certain way to fit in the white box. And what we need to do collectively is to say, you know what, I'm gonna ditch your boxes. I'm gonna start to see eye to eye with people. And I'm going to recognize our history and the traumas that we have in our communities, the history that we haven't been teaching our children in the schools. We are going to come collectively and start to learn about each other and about ourselves, how we see racism in our communities. How do we actually recognize that we have bias towards other people? That's what we need to start doing. And through the work that I've been doing in this district in particular, speaking with communities who have no idea that there is racism in our country, and speaking with communities who have been literally, their lives have been destroyed by racism in our country. They've lost loved ones to police brutality and to gun violence and to the trauma in their communities that hasn't been healed or addressed. That's how we bring people together. It's providing that safe space. And the policy making, Tommy, is where we can heal, right? We can create policies that can relieve the poverty burden economically. But we have to actually do the work in our communities that's going to take generations to eliminate racism and systemic racism in our country. And I know this district is up for that.
Ihssane, thank you so much for giving us the time on Brookline Interactive Group. I'm delighted we were able to have a conversation. The election, as you know, and as our viewers ought to know, is on Tuesday, September 1st. And there are two very different ways you can vote. You can vote in person, wear your mask, keep your distance, vote in person. That's perfectly fine. Polls are open 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. And double check with your municipality. Some of the polling places have moved under COVID. There's been some consolidation. The other thing you can do is vote by mail, but time is running out. If you haven't applied to vote by mail yet, you need to do it today. You cannot wait because you've got to get that application in. They've got to get the ballot to you, and you've got to get it back in time for the election, and that's not a ton of time. So if you're going to vote by mail, do it right away. If not, we'll see you at the polls on Tuesday, September 1st. Ihssane Leckey, one of 9 Democratic candidates for the Massachusetts 4th House District. There are 2 Republican candidates as well. So pick your poison, as we say, and make sure you get out and vote. Ihssane, thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you around town.
Thank you.